Um, as Allison said, my name is Caroline Byrne. So I'm a wildlife biologist with a company called Biodiversity Research Institute. And I'll talk a little bit later about my citizen science project called the Little Green Bat House Project. As a quick introduction, bats are a small flying mammal. We have about 8 to 9 species here in the Northeast, depending on where you are, up to 10, depending on where you are. There are a few species that will use bat houses, including one federally listed species known as the northern long-eared bat. So that's one species that is actually federally listed that theoretically could use a box, especially here in Maine and New Hampshire. Okay, so there are several types of bat houses, and this has changed pretty substantially, I would say, in the past probably 10 to 15 years. There's been a lot of research that went into what types of bat boxes are the best. And the reason that's important is because these structures or these bat boxes that you would build are actually what's known as a maternity roost. And what that's used for is during the middle of the summer, the bats actually give birth in the beginning of the summer. And what they'll do is they actually will group together, the females and what's called a pup, which is a baby bat, will actually group together in big, large colonies inside of a bat box. So things like temperature, making sure that they're not being predated upon or eaten is really important. And then also placement so that bats will actually find it and then also have access to resources that are important. So water, food, making sure that they're getting enough sun. So with that in mind, there's different types of bat boxes that work better for different species. And there's bat boxes that just generally work better than others. And one thing is size. You can see here in these pictures, this is a pretty wide bat box. And these are really important. The smaller the bat box, the less stable, essentially, the temperature will be inside. So the one in the upper, I guess I can actually use my cursor. The one up here, this is actually a very simple design. This is literally 2 pieces of plywood and then just a little spacer. And this is a great bat house, especially if this is the first time building something. It's very easy. What's important to remember, though, is that this bat box is great to put on buildings because the building will actually offer a good temperature buffer or keep the temperature inside more stable, which is important. Or you can actually mount 2 of these back to back, and essentially that'll give you the same temperature stabilization inside the box as the building would. So this is a good one, especially if it's your first bat box or first time building something at home. And this is a good example of what a bat box looks like. So what you're actually looking at here is if you looked up underneath of the bat box, this is what you would see. So these little X's are the spacers that you can see on this one. So you have the little X's, and then this piece in here is a piece of wood. And then this is spacing. So essentially, the way I explain a bat box is the birdhouse is upside down. So birdhouses have that little hole in the front for the birds to come in and out. Bats have the hole in the bottom. The reason for that is bats are, as they come flying in, they'll actually land on the tree or the building and then just kind of scurry up inside. So they need a place to land and then climb inside. They can fly directly in, but that's less common. And then this is a more complicated bat house. So this one actually has a really fun name. It's called a rocket box. And what it is the same thing. So these are all those little spaces on the inside or what's called a chamber. That's what these are. The space in between is a chamber. But the thing about it is that this has spaces in all of this has chambers in all different cardinal directions. And what that allows for is, say it's too hot one day. So the bat's going to move from the south facing side to maybe the north facing side to cool down. Or maybe it's warm in the top of the box than the bottom of the box. So they'll scoot down if it's too warm or too cold. They can also do that. And the closer they are to the inside of the pole, the closer it will be versus being on the outside might be warmer. So this actually gives bats a lot of selection where they can actually move around inside the box. So you give them a lot of different options in one box. And then condos, I added that word here at the bottom. So a condo is actually, it's essentially a purpose-built structure for bats. And they can be absolutely huge. They almost look, sometimes they almost look like a utility shed on stilts. And they'll essentially just the entire bottom will be all of these chambers. So you can go from what's called a single chamber box, so this is the one I was talking about that's really good on buildings, to a rocket box, which is more complicated, to something called a bat condo, which is a purpose-built building for bats. So basic construction, so I just wanted to give everybody some provisos. I think sometimes when you look at bat box plans, they look like you need to have a degree in rocket science to be able to do them. And I don't think that that's the part that you should focus on. First thing I want you to look at is the picture. If you look at the bat, so this is the back of a bat house. You can see that this isn't one nice piece of lumber, right? This is I had some leftover barn wood that wasn't pressure treated. And we actually just cut these to actually make the bat box back. So as long as it's sealed in, you know what I mean, covered, it doesn't have to be some perfectly, you don't have to go buy the best plywood and all that stuff to actually make these. So just keep that in mind. So the first important thing is not using pressure-treated lumber. Pressure-treated lumber has a lot of chemicals, and there's actually parts of Europe that actually don't even allow you to use certain things like that for bats because they think it actually might affect the pups as they grow. Because when say the pups have been rubbing against the pressure-treated lumber and then the mothers groom them, they'll probably be ingesting those chemicals. So there's a lot of concern for that. So going for rough cut and non-pressure treated lumber is better. And the most successful bat houses, so this is kind of the culmination of that science I was talking about in the beginning. Most successful bat houses have chambers, so that little inside space in between the pieces of the wood should be at least 20 inches tall, 14 inches wide, and then 3 to 6 inches landing. So I talked about how the holes are on the bottom for the bats, 3 to 6 inches landing. So if it's up against a building that's not plastic siding and they can actually land in the building and crawl up inside, that's fine. Or if it's on a tree, that's also fine. Otherwise, you just need to extend the bottom of the bat box and make a little landing zone, almost like a backboard on a basketball hoop, and they can land there and crawl up inside. And because we are in the Northeast, you should paint it a darker color. Reason for that, one, it's gonna help preserve the wood and actually make it last longer, but two,
being held accountable. I don't know that anyone is.
Pardon? I heard something, I don't know what it was.
Somebody just joined and it wasn't muted yet.
Oh, okay, sorry, I thought it was a question. So because we're in the Northeast, especially up here in Maine and New Hampshire, things like that, so during maternity season or when bats are raising the pups and using these bat boxes, they want it really, really warm. And by painting it a darker color, you're actually you're gonna increase that getting that solar heat. And that's really important. So painting it a dark color, black, dark green, dark red. I painted them like barn red too, if you want it to blend in with the building. So make sure that you're painting it. And then the space between the chambers is between 3/4 and 1 inch. So when I say that, so say this is the chamber in the bottom of a bat box, my immediate test for the Northeast, because our bats aren't that big, is if I can stick my hand in and it stops at the knuckles, I know it's small enough. Because if it's any bigger than 1 inch, that's not ideal for the bats we have up here, but also the wider that is, the easier it is for a predator like a squirrel or a raccoon to actually crawl up inside and actually pull the baby bats or the adult bats out. So having those space in the chambers smaller is a really good predator protection for them. Installation, buildings or poles are best. And the reason for that is that there's less chance that something like a feral cat or a raccoon or something like that is gonna be able to crawl up to and get to the bat box. Trees obviously offer a little bit more like gripping for things like raccoons and cats. But also, if they want it really warm, having it on a tree where the leaves are gonna actually hang over and actually shade the box isn't ideal for temperature. So putting them on a building or a pole is better. If all you have is a tree, that's fine. But making sure that you're getting that good solar exposure. So putting it on the southeast side of whatever structure you're gonna use. You have options, and I think you think it's everything the animal needs, right? Food, water, and shelter. So it's really good to make sure that you're near some kind of water source if you have it. So if you say you have room on your property or you know a good place near a park where one can go, if there's a small pond or stream, that might be a good place for one. Also, a lot of times I get calls for bat boxes when someone has bats in their barn or their house and they're actually gonna exclude them. And what that means is they have a professional come in and they actually essentially block the bats from coming back in. So the bats can get out, but they can't get back in. So putting a bat box up before you do that and then putting it kind of near where the bats are being excluded from may actually increase your bat house success. A mix of agricultural and woods. So if you have a big field, that's not a bad place. One, it's going to get really good solar exposure. Two, there's going to be a lot of insects around. They can also help out for your agricultural pest control. And then woods, because they also may forage in that wooded area or use other trees as roosts if it's too warm. And we talked a little bit about the water source already. And then we had talked about the single chamber. So that's the really easy one with the 2 pieces of plywood, making sure that you're either mounting those back to back, so one here, or mounting on a building to make sure they're getting that good temperature regulation. And if you're interested, I have a little community science project that I actually started with my grandfather called the Little Green Bat House Project. I need to change this. So the proper terminology now is the community science. So community science project providing roost habitat and understanding for bats. So the goal of this is to answer anybody's questions about bats that they have. We don't do any kind of excluding of bats, but if you're trying to put up a bat house or you have a question, we can easily help you out with that stuff. And if you end up putting up a bat house, it doesn't have to be little or green, or if you already have one or you have a bat roost in your barn or tree, and you want to report it and be part of the project, that would be great. We'd be glad to have you. And down at the bottom, it's burnbatbiology.com. That's actually the website for the Little Green Bat House project. And they're also on Instagram and Facebook. I'll apologize now, the website's a little bit under construction, so forgive us for that. But if you're interested, we'd be love to have you. And with that, I'm gonna keep it pretty short for questions, but this is a good example. So this here is a chamber. So that's the space, and then this is another space. And then these would be the pieces of wood. So this is as if we're looking up at the bottom of a bat box. And then this is kind of the edge of the bat box. And what here, these are actually 3 of the federally listed species I was talking about. So this is the northern long-eared bat. So this is kind of a neat, neat file. Hopefully you can hear the sounds. I've actually dubbed the social calls in. So this is just them hanging out in their bat box. So one of them will end up flying out here. So you can see, I think there's 5 total. So the one that's kind of jittery and you see the ears bouncing, that bat's actually echolocating before it leaves. So yeah, I included just so people can kind of see how, I think getting an up close look at bats doesn't really happen for most people. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to show people kind of what would happen inside the bat box. So this is right at dusk. They're getting ready to leave to go eat for the evening. And with that, I think I should be able to, just gonna replay. With that, I will put the Citizen Science Project information back up. And I'll be glad to take any questions.
Everybody should be muted at this point, but you can unmute yourself. One question we had at the library, actually, does light matter? Like if we put a bat house up on a pole, if we do it like in a parking lot where there's a street light, does it need to be as far away as possible from that? Or would that deter bats?
I don't think so. There are species that you'll see kind of foraging or eating around lights. So they do actually go to lights. If you have an option, I'd put it farther away just for it making it easier for a predator to see the bats as they come out. I don't know that it would necessarily deter the bats, but it may actually be easier for a predator to see them. So if you could get it a little bit away from the light, I would think that would be better, but I don't think it would deter them from using it.
We're also curious, what kind of data would people collect as a citizen science project? So
it's essentially the level of involvement. The goal of this is essentially be able to, if the landowner or whoever, bat box owner or barn owner, was willing, was to eventually be able to kind of pass this information on to the states. Because for those of you who don't know, bats have had a rough ride lately, especially with white nose syndrome, which is a fungus that affects bats during hibernation. It doesn't affect us, and what happens is they keep waking up essentially to groom too much and actually go through their hibernation reserves too quickly. So they've seen in some species, in some states, it's been almost 98% mortality in the entire population. So just giving them a little bit of an extra boost is good. So even just knowing that, hey, I still have a colony of bats in my barn, or I put a bat box up and the bats aren't using it. That's all data, that's all good. And that gives the states or even just the project a better idea of what's going on in the landscape. So you can either just be, hey, I have a barn and there's still bats in it. You just contact once, or you can monitor it, as much as you want. And there's a form on there to do something called an emergence count. And an emergence count is where you go and you sit a little ways away and you actually see how many bats come out right at dusk. And that kind of gives an idea of how big the population is. And there's different behaviors that bats will do if there's juveniles in the box. So you can actually see if you've got an active colony that's actually reproducing. So there's a whole spectrum of data. And if people have questions specifically, I'd be glad to answer them.
Are bats doing a little better now, or is it?
They have a few species that they think are slightly leveling out and not at a very, very low number. There are some species that don't seem to be affected as negatively. Those are usually a bigger bodied bat because they have more fat reserves or the ability to put on more fat reserves. And then there's species called a tree bat, which is, so there's two different major groups of bats in the state. One is tree bats, so they don't really use caves or mines where the fungus is actually affecting bats. And these are called tree bats. And what they do is they actually migrate down south for the winter. And they're not affected by white nose syndrome. So we have 3 species here in the state. So those are doing better when it comes to white nose syndrome.
There are a couple of questions in the chat. One is, what's the average time for bats to find the house?
It really depends. The best success I've had is the larger boxes. I mean, you probably can't see my hand, it just disappeared. But a pretty big box, I've had really good success, especially with something called a big brown bat, which is becoming more common due to it's doing a little bit better with white nose syndrome. Especially if they've been excluded from a building nearby, the success can be pretty high. But if the bat box is placed poorly, I've seen people put up bat boxes and never get to use them for 20 years. So it really depends on placement and what your bat populations are. Because especially here in Maine, bat populations are probably very low from what we can understand based on white nose syndrome. So it could be the next day or it could be years down the road before they use it.
The other question is, when do bats come out in the spring? It says, I saw one flying around in the afternoon last week and it seemed odd.
Well, it depends on where they're coming from. So if they were hibernating nearby, they'll actually come out and actually forage a little bit or eat a little bit around the area where they were hibernating and then go to where they'll be during the summer or stay. Some bats will actually stay right where they hibernate. It's not odd. It's getting a little bit warmer and they'll start to come out. And you'll even see bats out sometimes in the winter eating something called winter moths. They'll be out during the winter. And then also seeing bats, if you see a bat flying by during the day and it looks healthy, it probably is. Because during the summer, the females actually are nursing pups, so they need a lot more energy. So even seeing a bat flying during the day, as long as it's not acting weird, it's on the ground and looks sick, that bat's probably fine. So they actually do things that they're not supposed to all the time. So, yep, it's about time. So they'll come in here in the spring. They'll actually start giving birth here in the middle of May. So it's actually getting pretty close to why they're coming back.
There's a question that says, is there a person or organization that can be hired to help install a box?
To install. I don't actually know the answer to that. I can look that up and get back to people if I have maybe I can send you emails, Allison, you can pass it on. I'm actually not sure. There are a lot of companies that make them, but I'm not sure if anybody actually installs them.
And it added, and give general advice. I'm a city boy now living in Maine.
Yeah, if you need general advice, feel free to contact me. That's fine.
I will put my email address.
That was me asking that question. There's no, I tried putting up a bat box years ago, and I think the trees I have just sway too much. So now the poor bat boxes kind of fell off the tree and been sitting there. But I would love to get bats. At this point, I'm like, just hire someone to build it and hang it up and come and see where to place it. So
where are you in Maine?
Kennebunk.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I may actually have an extra one if you want it. If you're close enough, I could drop it off. But
yeah.
But yeah, if you send me a picture of where the bat box was and kind of what it looks like, I might be able to give you some more advice on, oh, it's kind of small, or maybe move it to this other tree. I mean, the one thing to remember is bats will roost in active bridges. So people like I've seen like a 4-lane highway, bats are in the bridge. So I don't know if it was the swaying that they wouldn't use it. Maybe it just didn't have enough solar exposure. Okay. That easily could have been one. So I guess my email isn't in here, but I will put my email in the chat.
Yeah. Or can I find you through the Facebook or Instagram as well?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I can do that as well.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I was so excited when you started this event.
Yeah,
someone heard my prayers.
There's another question that says, maybe high school technical programs would adopt this work. I'm a high school teacher and I'm thinking our NHS students will take this project on.
I would be glad to help out with that. Let me know. But we did a quick bat building workshop out at Land Home Reserve there in Wells. And that actually had a lot of interest. It was actually pretty neat. There was a bunch of people that actually came out. We actually built bat boxes to replace the ones that are already on site. So I would be glad to help out if somebody wants to help take that on.
You can always email the library and I can get in touch with Caroline if
Yeah.
you're not.
Just trying to see. Can I open the chat? Oh, I still can. All right. So my work email is here.
Having any luck on Google.
Oh, can you just take a photo of that for me? That email address.
And do we have any other questions?
It was very informative. Thank you.
We'll be posting this on the library's YouTube channel, so if you need to go back and see how the bat houses are built, you can rewind and watch again.
Yeah, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions.
Okay, cool.
Thank you so much, Caroline.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks for